maidens a milk and did go. 3 maidens a milk and did go. And the wind it did blow high, the wind it did blow low. It tossed their petticoats to and fro. So it's off to the green woods went they, and it's off to the green woods went they, and he tapped at the bush, and the bird it did fly in, a little above her lily white. Her sparkling eyes they did turn round, just as if she had been all in a swoon. And she cried, "I've a bird, and a very pretty bird, and he's pecking away at his own ground. He's a help to the bird in the bush. He's a help to the bird in the bush. And we'll drink up the sun, we'll drink down the moon, that the people say little or much."
Hi, welcome back to the channel. This is the Ineffableelse. Welcome to the next video in our series all about Jupiter. This time we'll be focusing on Jupiter in Libra. This will be a very well-informed video considering this is my placement. So I'd like to start with a poem that I heard during my Jupiter return when this happened in 2017 when Jupiter was last in Libra, and it's from a fellow astrologer, and the poem goes as follows. Relationship, created from above, a vessel for the journey of love, sailing upon the human seas, mirrors of self which set me free. Our human goal, above any other, to reveal one another to each other. When I relate to you, I learn and I see, but my greatest learning is always about me. This is why relationship must be my key to self-mastery. And that has evidently stuck with me through these years. Because if you have Jupiter in Libra, Jupiter in the 7th house, Jupiter conjunct with Venus, as with Jupiter in Taurus, you're going to have a level of real abundance and beauty and prosperity, but you will also be finding your greatest blessings and benefits from this life come through your relationships. So it's a delicate line for you to walk along in terms of not falling into codependence, because much of your luck, much of your growth comes through your relationships. And whenever I've looked back, there's definitely been tendency for codependence, but there's also been great catalytic change and growth through relationship, because a relationship can never be static. If a relationship is static, then we're fooling ourselves that we're in a relationship. So a huge focus for you is to understand what relationship is. Because you can be alongside someone, calling them your significant other, but not actually relating on a deep level. When a transit happens with Jupiter passing through your 7th house, or coming into contact with Venus, or indeed Jupiter entering the sign of Libra, anything that you hope for in terms of a relationship will have the highest probability of germinating. My own experience is somewhat exaggerated in that regard. The beginning of the transit that happened in the end of 2016, I'd declared myself in a sort of state free of relationships, of the binds of codependence, and I went through a lot of experience of being alone with myself, being with many different people, relating. Relationship is not just a romantic one, it's also something that you have every day, how you relate to the people around you, your family, the shopkeeper, your teachers, how you relate to yourself, how do you treat yourself. And during this time I travelled extensively, more than I ever had. I went to 6 countries in 1 year, so I was travelling extensively, 3 different continents, which is evidently the nature of Jupiter, with its relationship with the bow and arrow of Sagittarius, the need for adventure and to travel. And whilst I was in Canada, I made a prayer with my heart to find my soulmate. If this person exists, I'd be curious to meet them. And there was not the same sense as in a codependent sense of need, desperation, I desperately need. With this placement we can fall prey to that desperate longing, or else a sort of terrified aversion, which was definitely a phase I went to, just trying to eliminate everyone, which is a necessary stage, I believe. But when I made that sort of longing from my heart, it was within the next 2 months that I came into contact with my soulmate, Ricardo, who I've been with now we're entering into our 6th year together. And it was utterly life-changing and like nothing else I'd ever experienced before over 6 years. And it has been during these past 5 years that I've made the greatest changes to my psyche, to my lifestyle, to my habits, and my frame of mind, as well as in my understanding of what relationship is. So I ask you to look again at the poem, listen again to the poem I read at the beginning. It's a relationship, it's a boat, it carries us through, but it's something that we create together as 2 individuals. We have to have our own, we're not giving 50-50, we're giving 100-100. In the relationship it has to be fully present, fully involved. Jupiter will call to attention all the areas where you are inadequate in relationship, where you hide parts of yourself, where you are guarded and protect yourself, because in those states you are not really relating. Relating is incredibly rare. The majority of people are not in relationships because they're not both on board. They're more or less riding with their own mental stories of what the other person means to them. We kind of see ourselves as being on these very individualistic journeys. I'm all for individualism. I think it's the only way that we progress is by really looking inward at what is unique to us and what is our unique path. When you're in a relationship with someone, it's because their path and your path, they're just the same. And this is what I came to find with Ricardo, was that there are never any compromises needing to be made. And that might sound really, really peculiar, because there are always, we're always told by sort of relationship gurus that you need to make a compromise and you need to really empathize with the other person. There's a telepathic nature in our relationship, which was evident from the get-go, especially considering we didn't share the same language. I didn't speak any Spanish, he didn't speak any English when we met. It was just me, him and his dog. And the 3 of us couldn't understand one another with language, so we were telepathic, we were feeling and very present in the moment, in the body. We didn't know how long we were going to be together because our lifestyles were very transient, so we were very much in the moment. And this may seem self-indulgent, but I want to make the point that this was specifically during this transit that this happened to us, and I had in theory opened myself up to this relationship factor in a very deep and honest way, but when I was then presented with it, I closed off and I went into a bit of a panic, and I was very tentative about coming back together with him. I was seeing a lot of myself reflected through his eyes. Sometimes if you see him, he has this sort of darkness in him due to his sort of Pluto in Scorpio being conjunct with the midheaven. When you meet him and you get to know him, you know that there are just no dark intentions within, and he's a very clean mirror. So you often see exactly who a person is based on what they project into that person. And in the beginning I thought, he's a demon, because he wasn't asking me for any of the things that other relationships have been trying to suck from me. He wasn't massaging my ego. He was so happy to have met me, and he just let me go. He was so happy. He was just beaming. And we left the gathering that we were at. We had to go our separate ways because of his dog. He needed a lift. And I went to France. I went to another country. And he went to Madrid and actually set up a home for us to be in, to go deeper. And I was too scared to join, so it took me another month and a half until I was ready to go and be with him again, because I felt I have to process. It was really, I have to avoid, because that potential for extreme growth was so terrifying. And just in those few days that we'd spent together in the beginning, I'd seen so much of myself. It was very confusing, very confronting. This is what relationship does. This is the huge mirror. The greatest learning is always about me. And he was meanwhile just so happy and sending me all these funny little voice notes in broken English, laughing with himself, just full of love, just so happy. And I was in lots of fear and resistance. And then when I united with him, he was fasting for 6 days before we were reunited, and I came back together with him, and I went into a fever for the next 2 days, and it was akin to an ayahuasca experience. My body was sweating, so much was coming out of me. I'd gone there, and for the first 15 minutes I'd been in a state of trying to impress him. I remember doing some sort of yoga pose on the floor, like, look how spiritual I am. And within the next half an hour I was going into a kind of feverish state, in which I just sort of lost myself completely. All the pretenses fell away, and as I say, I was almost sort of hallucinating and just feeling all this stuff gushing out of me without any substances, I might add. This is completely sober, and cleaning myself involuntarily, and that is precisely what I'd been trying to avoid for all that time. But Jupiter was there, expanding. Jupiter, if you look at my introduction video, it's very affluent and abundant, and brings through so much luck and good fortune. There's nothing to say that meeting him was not wonderful good fortune, but it was unbearably painful, because my baseline at that moment, although I'd opened up to the universe and, was much more light-hearted and optimistic, this was so far outside of my comfort zone. He was in such a higher place in terms of self-awareness, and there was no need for optimism with him, because he just has this stripped back understanding of life, that the contradiction in terms meant it was difficult for us to get to that place where we're really on the same level. The thing that was underneath that was, over time I learnt mine and his values were identical, so our paths could unite. And it feels to me that then my life started aged 24 when we met. However, I'd had relationships before. I'd had relationships with my parents. I'd had friendships. I'd had a boyfriend who was a Libra when I was 16, he wanted to marry me, and he was there, settled down. And that was a great thing for me to feel, because then instead of feeling that intense need for comfort and teenage, well, it might well have been something I would have dreamt of having. When it was then presented to me, it then triggered a lot of the Jupiterian, Sagittarian qualities in me to burst forward and no, this isn't what I want. I need to explore. I need to find the one. And it's all so cliche. But cliches, they really exist because it was true, and there is a real deep truth in it, which is then adopted as a means to conform, as a means to find a safety net where it makes sense. There was actually no sense of conforming, entering into a relationship with someone I didn't share a language or a nationality with, and on the surface, very different lifestyles, very different hobbies and passions. It was only when things were stripped right back to what our values are, bereft of culture and, yes, the culture that I'd been mixed around in, and just to something preconditioned, that we found the identical nature underneath, rather than in previous relationships, friendships, family dynamics, I'd lost myself within another, which is all too easy to do. With Ricardo, it was finding myself bare and unable to gloss over anything, or to simply adopt someone else's way of being. It was that codependence being eliminated as a possibility, and I had to be fully present and giving 100% of myself. So although I'm sitting in the sun here, the wind is really picking up. Libra is indeed an air sign, and it does blow in that wind of change, and it's a change to open yourself up to something much more beautiful. I've used myself as an example here because it is the element of my chart which is the most exaggerated. It also falls on the cusp of my first and second house, about values, about the self. Which house does this fall in for you? And likewise, if this is in the 7th house, which sign is it in? The different kind of combinations will come together and be reflected in your relationships. But whatever's happening, your relationships are never sidelined. They are front and center of your psyche and of your development, and they are key to the gifts that you have to share. They are dynamic, they are growing. Sometimes growing creates pain, growing pains, and it's not a cushy, comfortable thing most of the time. The thing that always comes back to me in this relationship is just how simple it is, and it would be to just open up and let go and sort of melt into the oneness which a deep relationship of truth allows you to do, and yet how it is not easy because of the trappings of the ego. And it can sometimes happen to us if we are prone to codependency, if we're very open and receptive and very empathic. There's then a sense of distrust, and sometimes if I don't open up with Richie and I say, and he asks me, what is it that you're feeling? And I say, I don't trust. And he's like, you don't trust me? And I say, I don't trust me. I trust you, I don't trust me. And it has a lot to do with dissociation and leaving the body and not being present for myself. So the greatest learning is always about me. It's always reflecting you back to you, rather than getting really lost and caught up in how magical and beautiful and wonderful the other person is. And even that first initial spark of love that was ignited in my teenage years, there was a clear path laid out for me. And honestly, with all of the exhaustion and the tiredness that I feel in terms of self-actualization, sometimes I look back and I think, Imagine if I'd taken that path, it would be so easy, but it wouldn't. It would appear to be easy, but it would not be simple, because it would require me to just leave myself behind and just hop on board of someone else's life train. And this can happen often with women. A big thing with Libra and 7th house is not being able to make decisions, leaving up to someone else. Richie asks me 5 times a day, what do you want? It's the most painful question. It's extremely painful, because I have developed such a knack for shutting down what I want, and it's sometimes unbearable. It feels like dying to be asked to make a decision, to choose what to watch, what to eat, where to go, what do I want to do. And comment down below if you can relate to that, because that's really bizarre. Don't you find that's a really strange thing? It should be something that we feel wonderful about and can move forward to finally get what we want. But the nature of trauma and the trauma of rejecting ourselves is later made much more difficult when we then do want to engage with who we are and what we want from life. I've been tuning in a little bit recently to the reality of the dating world out there. It seems to be really tough out there, really hard to meet someone, even harder to then connect on a deeper level because people are very closed down. I've noticed something very interesting. My role has proven to be helping people see themselves, and it's quite crushing having this placement which is so invested in the other and sharing what I have, when often it's the ugly truth that people don't want to see about themselves. Or worse still, it's a beautiful quality that someone has, and I tell them through a reading, and then this isn't everyone by any means, but there are a few people I've given readings to, and it's hit them so hard, their gifts, and it's so scary. And they have been involved in codependence, that it makes it extremely hard to then open up to the possibility of engaging with this thing for in and of itself, for yourself, with yourself. And the thing with a true relationship is that you're with someone who is completely on the same page. It doesn't mean that you both want to have, like Richie doesn't want to be an astrologer, that's not his cup of tea, but he completely supports me in it, and he understands the reasons why I do it, and he understands that he does a similar thing using a different tool. And there are many areas which overlap, and it all comes down to the core value within the motivation that gets you to move through the day. The ultimate trial, and it will be a trial by fire, a lot of your relationships, because it's about you developing discernment, because there's such an urge and such a desire to have your soulmate and to have that other half of yourself, and to be able to just reach, because it's Venusian, remember, it's about beauty and love and harmony, and having that desire for that can easily be manipulated and crowded. So it takes a sort of vow of celibacy, a vow of absolute integrity to yourself, and a vow of not needing anything or anyone else for a period of time, and really engaging with that. I had a point of just thinking, this is me for the rest of my life. I'll join an ashram and that will be that, and that's what I want to dedicate my life to. It's then after that moment that I then meet him. Life is very unpredictable, but if you can train whilst you are alone, your ability to discern, your ability to spot a psychopath, your ability to spot your own blind spots about where you have gaping open wounds that people can easily wriggle their way into. And it's a strange level of compassion. It's not a compassion where you feel sorry for them and you get caught up in their thing. It's just a case of the world encourages manipulation and violence of that nature, so people are going to try. You know, if you have mold in your house, it's going to spread if given the right conditions. It's the nature of mold, so you need to see people like that almost as mold. It just is what it is, and the key thing for you is to know that you are completely fine alone, completely okay in your own sense of self, and that any true companion in your life will only add to that. And there's a key feeling of, if you are with someone and you feel great when you're with them and you feel flattered and you feel all the right tingles are going off, and then they leave you and then you feel like you need them and you feel a desperate sense of keenness and eagerness to please them or to find them, or they're always on your mind, that's not healthy. That's then created a dynamic which is again codependent, and there are many shades of the codependence that come through. When Libra is given the spotlight and is exaggerated, we are extremely keen listeners, and we're keen to hear the story of a person's life and to feel it and empathize with it. And that's a great gateway for psychopathic kind of tendencies, manipulative behavior to get in. And I just say that the difference that I then felt with Ricardo was, we then would spend a couple of months apart, 3 months together, a month apart, and it was like that. And the whole time, I never felt like an extreme need to contact him or what is he doing. I always had this sense of utter connectedness, and he obviously feels that way with me, because when I was going through, still, whenever I'm going through anything, it will be the moment that I get a note from him, or he will say, I've said this in previous videos, he'll say, what's happening? What's going on with you? And he'll just kind of know exactly when I'm not centered in myself and bring me back to my own center. And at no point do I feel a desperation for him. And I feel uplifted when we're together, and when we're apart, I feel a sense of confidence, which is that kind of bastion that anyone will tell you that's been in a really true, open, communicative relationship is vital in this time of extreme loneliness. But if I'm feeling low when I'm with him, it's because I'm not with myself. And as I say, I don't not trust him, I just don't trust me, and that's because I've abandoned myself. So don't get into a relationship with a true, deep, honest person if you don't want to see yourself. You can have many fluffy relationships that are superficial, many relatively nice ones in which you just lose yourself to the other person, or some truly diabolical ones where you're badly hurt. So whichever way you look at it, relationship is a tough bag. So better to do it the honest and expanding way, which is the thing you were gifted with at birth anyway, with having Jupiterian influence upon the area of your life, which is relationship. So the final thing is with families. You will then have a great ability, a great mind to zoom in and analyze dynamics within your family, and you probably will have scrutinized the relationships of your parents with each other, with their siblings, with their other various partners. You're very easily able to see the flaws in these things. So always bear in mind that being a fault finder and seeing the flaws is a gift, and you can use it and just don't allow yourself to become bitter about it. See yourself more as a kind of impartial judge that is up here, but maintaining that Venusian level of love underneath, that love for all beings and for all souls. I can't see anything of what I'm recording, so I have no idea if I'm in shot, but I hope that the message at least got across. And it has been a wonderful journey with Jupiter, following it year on year as it changes yearly, annually. It's a wonderful thing for us to tune in to. And we are just in the sign of Aries, so it's a new cycle for Jupiter as of now. So look at that as how you're going to expand and grow over the next 12 years, and take the reins of that. I really wish you well. Please contact me if you'd like to have a full reading of your birth chart and to take into account all of the other things within your chart. Please leave me a comment below. How is your relationship to relationships? Do they frighten you? Are you sucked in by them? Are you in a wonderful partnership? As rare as that is to find. Honestly, if it had been a few months prior to my meeting of him, I probably would have run a mile. I almost did, because the intensity and the potential for change was so stark and so frightening. So even if we come across our soulmate, we may run a mile because we're seeing ourselves. And that's a scary thing to see. But I guarantee you, your true self, your truest, most wonderful self under there is so worth getting to know. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. When this catchphrase of love yourself, oh, we need to take that deeper. We need to really understand what it means to love yourself. Really, like, to be present with yourself and to give yourself wonderful posture for yourself because you respect yourself and you love yourself and you're curious about yourself. That's the nicest thing. When you have real curiosity for another person, you have real curiosity for what you have within. So I love you a lot. I have a lot of love. I'm blessed with that. And it's just magnified and emphasized by Jupiter. So thank you so much for being here. All the best.